Hello everyone, welcome. So I want to begin by dedicating this class to a dear friend, Yosef Aryeh ben Liba Bluma, for a complete and speedy recovery for Shleima. And the theme of tonight's discussion is, what is intelligence? So many of us pride ourselves in being called intelligent creatures, intelligent human beings, and it's a broadly used word, but the question is really, what is it? And always when it comes to something that you want to understand, the better you understand what the theme is, what the topic is, or what the power, the faculty of intelligence is, perhaps can also teach us how one can expand and become a more intelligent person. Intelligence is considered to be a virtue. The question is it in our control? Are we just born that way? Each of us wired in a certain way, or is there more to it? So the counterintuitive responses to this big question are all based on different ideas in the Torah, but also particularly in this week's Torah chapter, which, as I've always pointed out, contains very profound and universal lessons for all of us, but sometimes they're concealed or hidden in the cryptic words or the mysterious language of the Torah. So Judaism in general, and the Torah in particular, Judaism in general, which is based on the Torah as its so-called blueprint, has many dimensions to it. Generally speaking, we talk about 4 dimensions in Torah study. There's the literal interpretation of any idea. There's an allegorical interpretation. There's the homiletic, the Talmudic, and then there's the mystical. They make up an acronym called Pardes. In Hebrew, Pardes means orchard, but it's an acronym of 4 Hebrew letters: Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod. These are 4 letters that mean these 4 things that I just said. So literally every verse and every episode and every narrative in the Torah has these 4 dimensions. The Arizal, Isaac Luria, goes even further and says that every letter in the Torah has 600,000 interpretations in Pshat, 600,000 in Remes, 600,000 Drush, 600,000 in Sod, in the mystical. So what is 4 times 600,000? 2.4 million. So in case you thought you mastered it all, there's a few more to come. And the point is, like anything in wisdom, there's layers and layers and more dimensions and more dimensions, and really it's like an endless journey. That doesn't mean that what we understand is not fulfilling. It just means that, like climbing a mountain and broadening our horizons, we expand the horizons as we climb and we see more. So intelligence is something that is discussed in different parts of the Torah, as I mentioned, but also in this week's chapter, interestingly, begins with a law. It says Zos Chukas HaTorah. It's a law that actually is considered to be super rational. It talks about the laws of purification from death. And Chukah in Hebrew, there are 3 different words used for a mitzvah. There's a word called Mishpatim. Those are the logical, rational laws. Rational laws include, for example, all the laws between human beings. Do not steal. No, treating another person kindly, welcoming guests, charity. These are rational laws. What does rational mean? That our minds could have conceived even if no one had told us. They make total sense. A second category of mitzvahs is in the category called Edus. Edus means a commemorative law. It means like a witness. It's a commemoration to something. Shabbos goes in this category, holidays. The law itself is not necessarily purely rational, that's what's right to do, but it makes sense. To commemorate something special, we designate a holiday. That's called Edus. It's commemorative. And then there's a third category that is called Chukim. Chukah means a law that is not rational at all. Not irrational, but super rational. That no human being would ever have conceived of this. You know, the laws of kosher go into that category. The laws of purity and impurity. Different laws that don't have any basis in rationale, but it has a certain, let's call it, super-rational dimension. But the interesting thing, this categorization compels us to explore and understand what exactly rational mean anyway. In other words, you can ask the question: is logic logical? For example, who decided that logic is logical? Is it based on consensus? For what some people consider rational, other people consider irrational. What's considered rational? For some people, faith in God is a given and as rational as anything in life. For others, it's a superstition. There are many things in life that some people consider very correct, intelligent, and logical, and some don't. So who defines even what the rules of logic are? So this itself is a debate in scientific writings and philosophy of science. Karl Popper, famously, who's an Austrian, English, British philosopher of science, he wrote that a scientific theory, by definition, has to be able to be disproven. That means what's considered a scientific theory legitimate is that it has to be able to be disproven. The statement, God exists, is not a scientific statement because you can't disprove it. So in an interesting way, you can actually say scientific criteria for logic, or for a legitimate theory, is one that can be proven or disproven, which in turn throws everything in for a loop. That means it's not absolute truth, it's a theory that has to be able to be disproven. Is that logical? In other words, is it logical to say that logic is absolute? Or logic states that there are relative situations and logic can evolve, and what is logical today may be not so logical next year? Today there are things that we accept as a given, been proven in the laboratory, that 100 years ago would have been considered insanity. Ideas, for example, about how subatomic particles work, quantum mechanics. When they were first discovered, they were considered bizarre, weird, counterintuitive. And yet today, they are the standard. So we can see things that are mysterious or to the point of even anti-logical, things that would defy logic, that become very real. Once upon a time, we looked at the world in a very, let's call it, static fashion. That which was powerful was very obvious. If everyone left this room, for example, the room would be considered empty. There's no one, even kindergarten child knows otherwise today, that the world is brimming with dynamic energy. There are subatomic particles everywhere. There are air and light waves everywhere. You pick up a cell phone, right? You can be a television or radio, and you can pick up transmissions. How are they getting to you in an isolated area is because there are invisible forces at work right now in this room. And how many are there? Who knows? It doesn't occupy time and space quite as we do. So initially someone would say, one second, but I can't see it, I can't hear it, I can't taste, touch, or smell it. So, well, you know what? There are other tools and other instruments with which we could perceive these forces. So, is love, for example, rational? Is love intelligence? Some people say love is insanity. There are even evolutionary theorists that say love is a very big inconvenience. The whole romantic life. If you look at bacteria, or look at other animals, they just breed without the whole complications. They have to spend billions of dollars on dating, and on bars, and going to museums, and visiting places. They join, they mate, they bear their offspring, and they move on. You can argue that it's a very inefficient thing, courtship. The aggravation involved, the time spent, the energy, the money. I've actually read that some evolutionary biologists claim that this was a quirk of evolution that didn't work out well. It's not efficient. If the ultimate is the survival of the species, it would have been much more efficient without having all these so-called peripheral activity. Like I said, animals are most efficient. They join when they have to join together to breed the next generation, and they move on. No dramatics, there's no therapy involved, nothing. So, you could very much argue that love itself is irrational. Maybe from the point of view of evolution, it's necessary because it brings two people together and creates some commitment, so that it will be good for the offspring. And we all know many things about love are very painful and very vulnerable. So it's not the most efficient tool. On the other hand, imagine life without love. Imagine growing up, no one ever loved you. Unfortunately, today there are people that don't have to imagine it. You can be alive and be dead if one doesn't have love. It's the most important nurturing force in life. To be cared for, to be loved, to have the nourishment that it does. And the same thing with other forces that are not quite tangible. Yes, we need food and drink to survive physical food, but how much spiritual nourishment do we have? Which is either doing meaningful things, contributing in some way, feeling you have something to add. These are intangibles, and yet no one would say they're irrational. They say they may be different, like the subatomic particles. You may not be able to quantify it quite the same way, but you cannot say that it's not intelligent. Love, you can think of it from a certain perspective as maybe one of the most brilliant aspects of life, that a person can love another person, can care for them. It's one of the most dramatic and most noble and beautiful things that people have done in the name of love. It can be painful too, yes, but what it brings to life is immeasurable. If we were just pure materialistic creatures, just taking care of our needs, what would life be like? What would it look like? So just to emphasize how the word intelligence is a very difficult word to really say. What goes in the category of intelligence? Does it mean functional? Is that intelligent? Does it mean rational? What is even rational? What makes sense? There are a lot of things that don't make sense, and we do. And we were very proud of doing it. Like I said, people will sacrifice in the name of love. A mother or father will stay up all night and not go to work the next day if their child is not well. Well, hopefully they care that much. Is that rational? You could say it's not rational. You know what? You got to go tomorrow, go to work. You got a responsibility, pay your bills. Yeah, but the father and mother will never say that's not right. They'll say that's the most rational thing I've ever done. Is been there for someone I care. So the statement called being rational, not rational, is far more complicated than it appears when we first use those words. Like someone will say, I'm a rational human being. Really? How many decisions do you make that are rational? I would say that most of our decisions are actually not rational, are irrational. When it comes, because something affects you emotionally, suddenly your mind goes to the wayside. We like to say we're rational, and I'm not saying we're never rational, but look at the major issues in life. Those impulsive moves we make. How rational are they? How many mistakes do we make that we even know our mind tells us this is wrong for you, you still do it? Because if a moment of temptation consumes you, the mind goes the other direction. Are we emotional creatures? Are we truly rational human beings? When it comes to our subjective needs, it's very easy to argue that our mind is not the major factor. It's partially there, but above all, self-interest becomes the most important force. So when you talk about intelligence, are we intelligent beings? Do we behave intelligently? So clearly human beings have an intelligence that animals do not have. We've learned, even though we're weaker physically than animals, we've learned to master them. We've learned to tame the elements. We've developed technologies, medicines. Clearly the human race is a testimony to high levels of intelligence, of creativity, imagination, that other species do not have. So it behooves us to really try to understand what intelligence really is. So I'm going to share with you the mystical view on this. This comes from the Kabbalistic writings, and very much explains this week's chukas. What does it mean, a super-rational mitzvah? So with the teaching of the Kabbalah, there are many different writings. There are writings in the Zohar, which is the classic work of mysticism, authored by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Then there are the later writings of the Arizal. I mentioned Isaac Luria, lived in the 16th century in Tzfat, probably the greatest Kabbalist of all, who revealed mysteries and secrets of existence that are unprecedented. And then you have Hasidic thought, which really brings it all to contemporary terms. Actually, if you want to really say Kabbalah of our times, is Hasidus, basically. Because it takes Kabbalah, which on its own could be cryptic, mystical, and esoteric, difficult to access, translates it in language that we can relate to. And I'll show you an example of it right in a few moments with actual terms. So in the Kabbalah, you'll find the language, for example. Well, it's not an example, it's actually relevant to us. It says that the whole structure of existence is built on 10 spheres. With the first sphere being Chachma, which means wisdom. The second sphere being Bina, which means understanding. And the third sphere being Das, which means to know. And then come 7 emotional faculties. This is a Kabbalistic statement, taken from the Zohar, taken from the book of Formation, Sefer Yetzirah. And then the Zohar continues and says, but there's a sphere, and some say it's not a sphere, there's a dimension that's above the 10 spheres, and that is called Keser. Keser. Keser literally means a crown. So like a crown on the head. So if the head is Chachma, the wisdom, and working our way down is the rest of our structure, the faculties of the human being. So Keser rests above it. And when you used to read the Kabbalah, you may not know what this Keser is, just a cryptic word, a Keser, the crown. And then it discusses this crown is made up of two parts. One part is called Atik Yomin, and another part is called Arich Hampin. Atik Yomin means like the days that are removed, or ancient days sometimes is the way it's translated. Arich Hampin means a long face. So when you read this on your own, what are you talking about? The 10 spheres, we could figure it out. Our intellectual faculties, our emotional. What's Keser? What is it? What are these two parts? What does it mean removed? Long face? What are all these meanings? In Kabbalah you read it, you can't figure it out on your own because it doesn't speak about it in detail. It detail discusses these levels, but does not interpret what these levels mean. And then it goes on and says that in this two parts of Keser, these two parts of the crown, obviously I'm not going to keep this cryptic, I'm not bringing this up just to stay cryptic, I just want to show you how it's in Kabbalah and how then it's explained in Hasidic thought. So the next step says that the two parts of Keser are connected. They're connected by a thing called Moichus Tima, which literally means, in Aramaic, it means the hidden mind, the concealed mind. And then it says that the Moichus Tima has a relationship with the higher part of the crown and the lower part of the crown. And uses actual terms that are very physical. Like, for example, it says that the Moichus Tima is a step lower than what's called Galgalta, the skull. So now the skull is introduced. So we have a brain, a mind, we have a skull, we have a crown. So clearly, these are all so-called levels or dimensions in the human being, but exactly what they imply is not very clear. So the Kabbalists, when they taught this, obviously teacher to student, they explained it. But what's left on paper is somewhat cryptic. Comes Hasidic thought and uses these, explains and deciphers for us the meanings of these levels. And what illuminates for us is a tremendous insight into intelligence, into how our minds work, and how we function. And as a result of that, we can actually discover ways to actually broaden the channels that define intelligence. In other words, to become more intelligent human beings. Now, that's a pretty valuable thing. To be able to actually open up channels of creativity. A lot of people would do a lot for that. Most people think it's only possible actually with certain, shall we say, foreign substances. But as you'll soon see here, the Kabbalah and Chassidus teach us, and it's all connected to this week's chapter, that that's not the case. That we have the ability to access deeper levels, but we have to first understand ourselves. Today, a big part of health is that we understand the body better. When you understand how the body functions better, you can understand how to help it grow, how to nourish it, how to give it preventive medicine to prevent and avoid illness and disease, and also how to heal when a problem happens. Today we don't just heal things on a symptomatic medicine, we deal with things on a root level. We're able to understand what's causing something to be that way, because we have x-rays, we have CAT scans, we have other scans. We are able to understand the inner workings of the cellular structure, and as a result are able to intervene and deal with situations not on a surface level but on a root level. And the same is exactly true with our psyches and our souls. If you want to really understand yourself and really improve your psychological life, your emotional life, how you deal with challenges, the issues of fear, inhibitions, everything that affects us in our daily life, relationships, and so on, it's critical to understand the inner workings. What makes you tick? So this map that I just described in the Kabbalah is explained in the Hasidic thought as follows. In particular, it's explained, if you read the summary of this week's class that we sent out today. If you haven't, please leave us your email address, because we send out every week a reminder of the class and a description of the topic, a title and a description of what the class will be about. So this year we honor and celebrate a centennial of a great, maybe the greatest, the Mount Everest of all Hasidic mystical treatises, discourses ever delivered. In short, it's called Ayin Beis. Ayin Beis in Hebrew means 72, referring to the year 5672, which was 100 years ago, 101 years ago. Now we're in 5773. So it's a discourse that began to be delivered exactly in 1912, but continued through 1913, 1914, and so on. So we're now celebrating its centennial. As a matter of fact, I teach every morning a class on this treatise every day, every morning, and it goes up on YouTube, so there's a whole channel of classes on this. It's pretty dense stuff, but I study it inside of a text, translating the Hebrew and explaining it. And there's a whole section, I would say more than a whole section, almost a big part of it is based on the whole idea of what we're talking about, intelligence, the source of intelligence. And here's a summary, now translating what I mentioned before from the Eitz Chaim, from the Arizal, about Keser, the crown, they'll call it in simpler English. And the way it works is like this. Our conscious faculties are 10. 3 intelligent ones and 7 emotional, as I mentioned. So if you move all the way to the beginning of any experience, everything begins somewhere, right? Nothing is just has no beginning. You get an idea. The idea came from somewhere, and it started at a certain point. Whether you can identify that point or not is another story. But everything began. It wasn't there all the time. You have an emotional reaction. Something caused it, or whether internally or externally, something stimulated. The question is, where did it all begin? Where does the process of conscious energy begin? That's the real question. So let's think about ideas, concepts, ideas. Where do ideas come from? So some people think it comes from the shower head, because most people's ideas are in the shower. So therefore, people think just like the water is spraying out from the shower head, so too ideas. I mean, that's half a joke, obviously, or more than a half. But so where do ideas come from? So let's talk about the experience of an idea. I'll share something that you all know. Any idea falls into your head. It's exactly the word we use. Falls into your head. That's one of the words we use. Fell into. I just thought of it. Some people like to use flash. A flash bulb went off. A spark. It all is described always in this type of like something popped in, which implies and tells us immediately that a moment before it popped in, you weren't aware of it. Because else you don't call it popped in. It didn't just fall in. The moment you're aware of it, actually most ideas actually dissipate before you're even able to focus on it. How many ideas come and go in the middle of the day that just disappear and you don't even remember any longer? Sometimes an idea comes to your head and you forget what it was. Sometimes you can retrieve it, sometimes you can't. So there's no question, there's a constant flow. Just like that shower head, it's just popping in ideas. And maybe 1 out of 1,000 ideas perhaps will gain legs and move somewhere. Ideas. So when do ideas come to us? They can come randomly. You're walking down the street, suddenly you see something. But often they come when we're dealing with a dilemma. You have a dilemma, whether it's a personal dilemma, a professional one, business-wise. So challenge you looking for an answer. And then you say, you ever had that moment where suddenly something comes to you, you've been struggling, I think I have the solution. Sometimes it's correct, sometimes it's not. But that's an idea falls in. So sometimes pressure does it. When we're pressured, when we must come up with some solution. Sometimes we don't come up with something. So essentially the idea of a concept, that we conceive of an idea. Interesting word, conceive. Conceive is, we also use the word conceive for conceiving a child. So an idea is like a birth. And that again is a word been used very often. The birth of an idea. The birth of, where was it born? And there are many fascinating studies and books about great inventions in history. And people try to trace, when did the Wright brothers first think of what would cause human flight? When was the first automobile conceived of? And sometimes we can trace it, sometimes we can't. Sometimes it's very funny beginnings, sometimes it's accidents. But the bottom line is, it's a very mysterious place where the second before conception and the moment of conception. It's mysterious is because we don't know what happened the second before. Well, when we become aware of it, by the time you're aware, it's already happened. So if someone were to say, what's on the other side of the curtain? I just had an idea fell into my head. What's on the other side of the curtain? By definition, you can't describe it. Because if you could, it wouldn't be an idea. It would be there with you all the time. The mere fact that you say a spark or a flash means it's a flash. That a second before the flash wasn't there. So psychologists use terms like collective unconscious. The unconscious mind. That clearly in our mind there are dimensions that we're not aware of, but they're there. And from time to time, maybe very often, they burst into a flash bursts out of there, and that's the idea that comes into your conscious mind. So you could think of the unconscious as being like a reservoir of information, you can say, or a reservoir of potential intelligence, okay, that is unconscious. And from time to time, something like a pulses, pulsating energy, or a flash, however you want to put it, something bursts, like bursts of light. And on the other side of the curtain, which means our consciousness, we suddenly sense something. Think of it like this, just for imagery. You see a stage, a dark stage, and covered with a very thick curtain. But on the other side, there's a lot of light. It's a lot of light. And the light is constantly shining, but from time to time the light is a burst, like a burst of lightning. And it's so powerful that you can see it even through, for a moment, a glimpse comes through, a flash through the thick curtain. So even though the curtain is opaque, nevertheless, something shines through. So you realize there must be more where that's coming from. That's how we experience the conception of an idea. Just a flash, and we can't understand where it came from, but clearly there's something on the other side. The question is how that journey takes place. How that journey takes place. So here's what the Ayin Beis explains in the Eitz Chaim, the Rizal's writings, about what I said before. Chokhmah is where conscious intelligence begins. It's a spark. It then turns into Bina. Bina would be when you flesh it out. An idea that takes hold means that you're not just an idea, a concept, wasn't just conceived, it begins to develop. So if Chokhmah is like the conception, Bina is like the full-grown fetus in the womb. So Chokhmah is the conception, the spark, the first cell, then it begins to split. Intelligence, it means that you begin to divide and develop an idea and it becomes now comprehensible. There's an outline made, it's detailed, you can do something with it. If it should remain on the concept level, the pure Chokhmah level, it remains an obscure flash. It's there, but there's nothing we can do. That's why you find in businesses, very often, very successful businesses have the Chokhmah person and the Bina person. You have the guys that are very innovative and creative, but they're not implementers. They don't execute well. They don't know how to flesh it out. They don't know how to break it into details. And we know that the devil or God is in the details. There are people who are excellent at breaking things into detail. Give them an idea, they'll provide a brilliant plan how to make it happen. And their strength is not conceiving. And usually those two strengths don't go hand in hand. Because they're very different strengths. One is a focus far more on detail and make it sense. And the other one is more like genius, in a sense. It's more like a brilliance, a certain person who people come up with ideas. A great match is to have two people who can do both of those things well, and they join forces. So one is the idea person, the other one fleshes out, and it's not like one is better or superior to the other. It's very different strengths. So that comes Bina. Then Das is the third step when you finish a concept and it resonates. It's like a full-fleshed idea resonates. That's Das. So that's how it works from the top down. Starts with the concept, a flash, then it's fleshed out, and Bina is like a developed idea, and then there comes the conclusion. But now we're going to go backwards. Where does the flash come from? So here's what's explained. That the flash comes from an unconscious state of wisdom called Chachmas Tima. The hidden mind means unconscious mind. And that is a state sometimes related to the Koyach HaMaskil, the power to conceive of ideas, which we all have. But it is by definition a concealed state, not conscious state. It remains removed in that type of way. But since there is a connection between the two, that state pushes, and when something breaks through, it enters into the conscious mind and idea. So what we call a spark is actually called the end of the process on the unconscious, because the unconscious, it's a whole reservoir. Think of it like this. You have a reservoir of water that's pumped through the arteries and comes to a sink in your home. You turn on a faucet and a drop comes out. From your point of view, it's just a drop. From the point of view of the reservoir, it's the end of the process. From your point of view, it's the beginning of the process. So what we call the beginning of a flow is from the point of the reservoir, the end of the flow. So that little drop is coming from a very large body, of intelligence, and we experience only the conscious small drop. What's fascinating about this, as it continues to explain it, is that this piece of this chokhmah, this wisdom, this flash, has, in other words, a very powerful, concentrated form of intelligence that Bina, the details, don't have. Which is why you'll often see that when people conceive of ideas and then they start developing them, often they go off course. Once you start developing it in detail, you start realizing, hey, 1 second, something's wrong. Because you see, the details are important to implement, but the details don't contain the intensity of the original point of departure. Which is why one of the suggestions made in the intellectual process is always connect your details to the original point. In other words, if an idea comes up to you, to right now or tomorrow, write down the idea in one line. Then develop it as long as you wish. Then come back and look at that line. Is it consistent? Because that line will have in it a certain resonance, certain conviction, a certain, resonating truth that the details don't have. Which is very often why we need to go back to our point of departure. It's like a reality check to connect it to that so-called, what's called emes. So the Chachma, because of why is Chachma, the spark, having a truth that Bina, the development, doesn't have? Because it's still a spark, it's still connected, it's a drop from a source. That's where the real idea came from. And Chachma is aware, precisely because it's aware, that's why it only comes out as a drop. So the Hasidic discussions on this at length says that Chachma, he brings this in Tanya, in chapter 35, the name of the Maggid of Mezrich. So the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shnei Zalman, says the following. He says, Chachma always senses that there's something beyond it. In other words, intelligence always senses that there's something beyond intelligence. And this begins to teach us what intelligence is. You see, the deception is the following. Because we're self-absorbed creatures who also have egos and pride, we think intelligence is our domain. I own intelligence. I'm an intelligent person. We have a thing called intellectual property. I own intellectual property. I don't know if you know the rules of intellectual property, but essentially they were only made in order for incentives that people should conceive. So copyright law was written, but everyone agrees, except maybe a few people who just have just are much more self-absorbed. Everyone agrees intelligence cannot be copyrighted. Because intelligence, it's not, the person who conceived doesn't really own the idea. The reason we call it ownership, because you want to have incentive that he should invest in developing it and thinking. If a person doesn't have any interest, why would he go write a book? Why would he come up with an invention? That's why in copyright law, is it 50 years? I think corporate copyright is 80 years. But like, for example, copyrights, Charles Dickens' grandchildren cannot claim copyright any longer, nor Mark Twain, and so on. There's a certain limit. Why? Why not? Because everyone agrees intelligence is not owned by anybody. Just during his lifetime, and maybe another generation or two, you maintain the protection of the interests. We, however, live in a very commercial, material world, so we go to war over these things. But in truth, intelligence does not belong to anyone. Even secular law accepts that. The question is, they want to extend it another 10 years, 20 years, again, for financial reasons. The Torah always knew this. You know, the Torah was given in the wilderness, in the desert. The question is why? The Torah is the great gift of God. The Talmud calls it Chem de Gnuz, a hidden treasure. Why, if you gave somebody a great gift, where would you give it to them? Would you take them to a hot wilderness that was boiling hot and humid, uncomfortable, sticky, who knows what was going on there? Or would you take them to a nice restaurant, a nice beautiful place, and say, here's a nice gift? Imagine someone giving you a gift and they take you, let's go somewhere, they schlep you to some place, the most uncomfortable place on earth, and here's a nice gift. Why would God do that? There were beautiful cities. There was Alexandria. Okay, you don't want to go to Egypt. Egypt had its problems. There's Jerusalem, other cities. So the Talmud has the Medrash has a very powerful answer, very simple but beautiful answer. The answer is, because if it was given the Torah in any city, those people living in the city would always claim that they own it. And they'd want royalties. Every time we have a Torah class, the Jerusalemites would say, we want some royalties. It's ours. God gave it in a place that by all legal law is in no man's land. Nobody lives in the wilderness. That's why if you lose something in a desert, nobody can lay claim to it. Because there's no city there. So he wanted to give the Torah in a place that nobody can say, it's mine. Imagine, long before intellectual property, copyright law, the Torah knew the wisdom, because wisdom is by definition not owned by anybody. Do you want a wisdom that's owned by somebody? That's a wisdom you can't really trust. So everyone knows Woody Allen's classic joke, biting joke, where the guy comes to the rabbi and says, Rabbi, I hear that the Torah teaches the secrets to life. Yes, my son. Yes, my friend. I don't think rabbis say son. Yes, my friend. He says, will you teach it to me? Of course. And how much will it cost? He's expecting to hear, a price. So everything costs money. The rabbi says, how could I charge you? God didn't charge Moses and the Jewish people for the Torah. Moses didn't charge the people when he taught it. How could I charge you? And this guy's doubly impressed. I'm going to get the truth, plus free. It's amazing. And you can imagine a Woody Allen joke doesn't end like that. The story doesn't end. So they sit down, they open up a Chumash or whatever it is, text they open up, it's in Hebrew. He says to the rabbi, it's Hebrew, Rabbi, I don't read Hebrew. The rabbi says, Hebrew lessons, $10,000. So somewhere controls the flow. But this, of course, is a joke. Judaism, Torah, wisdom is not copyrightable because it comes from a greater place. And you'll ever read people who write about intelligence and write about their own flow of consciousness, they'll always say, it wasn't up to me, I was a channel. Something came into me. It was a gift. You hear this again and again. I was in the zone. Einstein said it. Musicians say it. Artists say it. And it is for people who do experience it. They'll tell you it's a moment of humility. Actually, that doesn't mean they don't have arrogance. They may afterwards come back, but the experience itself is humility because you realize that something greater than you is traveling through you. So if you're an intelligent person and an honest person, which we shall soon discuss whether intelligence is honest, that's the first thing you'll acknowledge. It's not mine. It came through me. So it's a little ironic that people like that then go to court fighting for intellectual property. Obviously, money always clouds things, and sometimes it's justified as well. The copyright infringement. But the entire companies that are just busy, built on their whole mission is just simply to litigate copyright infringement. So it becomes an end in itself. They're not looking for the truth. They're looking for money. They call a spade a spade. But Judaism, which does exactly that, talks about intelligence in this way. It's a gift. It's a gift that comes from a mysterious place. You were born. Who gave you a mind? Did you inherit it from your parents? No. Life itself is a gift. Is your life yours? You didn't create it. Even your parents don't own your life. It traveled through them. Well, whose life is it? You may think it's a ridiculous question. It's not. And Judaism addresses this question. It asks the question, can a person mutilate yourself? Can a person mutilate himself? The Torah forbids mutilating your own body. Even if it hurts no one but you. You know what the reason is? Because your body is not yours. It's a kinyan shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it says. It's God's property. He gave you a gift. Someone gave you a gift. And you imagine you're going to go and deface it? And say, hey, listen, it's a gift, as long as you're aware that it's a gift. Intelligence is the same thing. We didn't create intelligence. Intelligence is a gift. A human being has that gift, a faculty. And we should be thankful, because unfortunately sometimes a child is born with mental handicaps or mental deficiencies, and the gift isn't always given. So we shouldn't take it for granted at all. And the process of intelligence works that way. Chachma always knows this. Because it never can take itself, it never can think it owns it, because it's always a spark. How can a spark? A spark always knows I came from somewhere. Bina, when you start developing, begins to say, hey, 1 second, I understand it, I comprehend it, I can own it. Chachma always remains, and that's what Chassidus says, it's like a spark, a dot. Bittel, it's called. It knows that it's always a drop. It always knows it's just a flash, and that it's coming from a far greater place. So Chachma has in it a certain type of, sense of the integrity and truth of something. That's why you can find intelligent people can take their intelligence and do the most distorted and corrupt things, all masked in intelligence. But they have Bina, but they're missing is Chachma. See, Chachma has the element of truth and integrity. And many people say, 1 second, why is integrity so important to intelligence? So let me share with you the Talmudic story that says Shammai and Hillel, they were the two great sages that disagreed about different matters. And then came a voice from heaven that said, from now on, the halacha, the ruling will be according to Hillel. Not because Shammai was not a great scholar, but that was the ruling. The Talmud continues, why? So you'd think the answer was because Hillel was more brilliant. Because Hillel was a better arguer. He cited better sources. He was a greater scholar. Whatever the reason. No, the Talmud says, you know why? Because Hillel was the humblest one. He was humble. Not that Shammai wasn't humble. Hillel was the ultimate of humility. And how do we know this? Because when he would present his arguments, he would always present a Shammai's adversarial argument first, and present it well, and then he would present his own argument. He didn't present the other argument first in order to then show and to debunk it and to contradict it. He presented it, and then he presented his own. He had that presence of mind and that humility. So the question is asked, humility is a beautiful virtue. Give him a medal. But what does it have to do with a ruling, a legal ruling, which has to do with a scholarship? And the answer is very simple. Because the person who's not objective, can you trust their scholarship? If someone who's brilliant, but you know that they may not be thorough, or because they may be arrogant, then you're not sure whether they will really explore every possible option. You hire an attorney, you don't want to find out later that the attorney chose one approach because that's the vendors he deals with, and instead of looking at what's best for you. You don't find out that there was an interest, there was self-interest, or in some way there was the distortion. You want to know that a subject matter was addressed thoroughly. Hillel was a guarantee because he knew how to present the other argument. Now Shammai was obviously a great man, a tzaddik and so on, but that level of humility was Hillel's domain. So you see here that intelligence, in other words, has another element to it which is far deeper than just rational argument. You ever seen this debates where, for example, one person is far more rational, but for some reason you agree with the other person? Because you sense arrogance, you sense something's wrong. There may be better arguments, but you don't sense integrity. And sometimes the other person may have more integrity, even though their arguments may not be so great. You know, the Nazis, to use an extreme example, a lot of things they said were very rational. They were philosophers. They rationalized their whole racism. And for people who were so-called bought into it, it sounded logical. You know, to make anti-Semitism also logical. But what was lacking was integrity. It wasn't true. Nazi doctors who were sworn to protect life, ended up torturing, ended up experimenting in the horrendous, disgraceful ways on human beings, all in the name of medicine. All they needed to say to themselves that Jews are not human. So just like we experiment on animals. All logical. That shows you the flaws of logic, that when your self-interest is involved, suddenly logic can become the most obscene tool. And far worse than any animal. When a human being starts justifying his behavior, it's far worse than no animal would ever behave that way. Animals have their rules. They may be predators, but they'll never do something they'll torture. They'll never do something that goes to those extremes. And this was not claimed, Germany was not claiming to be a third world primitive country of cannibals. They dismissed people like that. They considered themselves the supreme of the Western Western thought, art, music, culture, philosophy, literature. So just to show you where intelligence can go. And they use their intelligence to find out how many people you can kill in an hour to the maximum. That's where they ended up using their intelligence. Most efficient way of killing. Just to show how distorted and how I don't even have the right word for it, how obscene intelligence can become when it's misguided. What they were lacking was the humility. The humility, it's not yours. And there's a truth that's higher than yours. And your intelligence is here to uphold the truth, not to create your own truth and use intelligence to figure out what you want. And this is a problem we all suffer in more milder forms. We use our intelligence to justify or to explain or to cover up our sins or crimes. Intelligence is a gift that Chachma always is aware that it's just a spark. It knows it's a spark. And therefore it senses there's something greater. It doesn't understand what's greater, but it senses. That sense of something greater, is that intelligent or not intelligence? So in Ayin Beis he says that's the epitome of intelligence. We think intelligence is when we embellish it, and when we develop it in detail and we can implement it. I didn't say that isn't necessary. That's how you build it. You can't build a building without Bina. But the core of intelligence is the resonance of truth in it. And then Bina comes in to develop it into a workable project. So suddenly truth is inserted right in there into intelligence. So the real essence of intelligence is what he says is when you're able to sense and see and be the conviction of something that's real. So think about it now. When you go to a lecture, well, you are right now at one, but you hear someone speak. You go to a class, you read something. Think when it really makes sense to you. Think for a moment. What makes sense? What's the most resonating element? Is it the logic? Someone presents a very logical case. 2 + 2 is 4. It all makes sense. It's a very nice case. Or is it deeper than that? Is it the logic, or is it resonating truth that what's written here senses? I sense a certain truth in it. Obviously, a good case is made. Because you can make a great case and then still, as I said before, have an instinct something's wrong. If you would read some Nazi propaganda and some of the things, it all may make sense on paper, but you'll know in your heart something's wrong here. Something's wrong if a doctor is in his laboratory twins human beings and experimenting them without anesthesia or something like that, or experimenting on them in general. I don't care what you put on paper. Something's wrong. So there's an element of intelligence that is not quite, you can't really call it, let's call it mathematical, technically correct. It's a resonating truth, and that's called Chokhmah. So wisdom doesn't work like this, that you go into a store and I'm going to buy a bag called intelligence. It doesn't work that way. It starts with a spark, a very obscure spark, a flash, telling you right away, I'm coming from another place. And then, if you are able to, you bring it down and you flesh it out into detail. So true wisdom is Chokhmah. That's connected to an unconscious place that senses things that are true. Another example, they say, there's a line, a favorite line of mine I really like. It says, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So if someone's speaking to you about, real estate or investment tips, so frankly, you don't care how much they care about you because you're coming here for information. I want to get my secrets, But if someone's talking to you about your life, about your personal life, emotional life, relationships, soul, things that are personal to you, you care. You don't care how much that person knows until you know how much that person cares. You sense someone cares for you, you're going to listen. You'll actually give the person the benefit of the doubt. Whereas if you feel someone doesn't care, then they can give you the best arguments, airtight arguments, and it won't enter. In another language, it could be what the Rabbeinu Tam says: "Dvarim hayetzim min halev." Words that come from the heart enter the heart. Words that come from the heart will enter your heart far deeper than the most brilliant equation. And words that come from the brain or the mind usually go in one ear and out the other. So what is it about words from the heart? What does that mean exactly? Why does that resonate more? Is that more intelligent? We wouldn't call it intelligent, it's more personal. But it tells you that there's an element of truth that really is necessary in a true idea. Not just that it's an intelligent idea, not just that it's smart. You can have smart, they're smart Alex. I know people who live their entire lives in fear, terrified of any relationship, terrified of being vulnerable because they were hurt when they were children. They're geniuses, and they have an excuse for everything. They're the most brilliant excuses. They're the brilliant escape artists. They always have a justification, and it's never them. It's always someone else in this situation. And the smarter they are, the more brilliant are their innovations. But it's all a little child that's afraid and is innovating ideas of how to protect his skin. And sometimes you see it. It's very sad, pathetic at times. Obviously, our role is not to expose somebody, to help them get beyond their fears. But you see it. I don't know if you ever met anyone like that. But the people are brilliant. Excuses, justifications. A person like that's never going to go anywhere because they're not ready to acknowledge that maybe I'm doing something wrong. They can't accept that. They're too afraid to do so. You'll see very secure people have no problem. Listen to me. They'll say, you have another way of looking at it? Tell me. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. Just making that statement is something that many people are afraid of. That makes it sound like I made a mistake, I'm wrong, and so on. No, we're a human being, and a healthy sign of intelligence. I would trust somebody far more who told me I made a mistake, and then I learned from a mistake, than someone tells me he never makes mistakes, which is not believable anyway. You'd rather find somebody who's acknowledges, doesn't cover up. So there's an element of intelligence that's not pure logic, but it's also not pure not logic. And from this Torah perspective, it's actually more logical than the pure mathematics of it, because it's more truthful. And intelligence is about the search for truth, not the search for me to be right. It's a search for real objective truth. And that requires an element of humility. Take away humility, then intelligence can become a major distorting force. So intelligence therefore has the element we call Reishis Chochma Yiras Hashem. What does that mean? The beginning of wisdom, the head of wisdom, the beginning, the root of wisdom. Reishis means also not just the beginning, it also means the Rosh, like the head of, the central nervous system of wisdom, is Yiras Hashem, awe of the divine. Interesting statement. Again, the same question can be asked like with Hillel. Awe, Yiras Hashem is very nice to have stand in humility in front of God. But what does that have to do with wisdom? It's two separate worlds. Give the guy a medal for being humble, for being God-fearing. No, it's the beginning of wisdom. Why? Because it's not just a nice thing to be humble. It's the core of wisdom is humility. Moses, the greatest scholar of them all. What was his ultimate virtue? The most humble man that worked on earth. This doesn't mean that he didn't have qualities. He never thought it was his own. He thought it was God-given, and he knew if someone else, he said to himself, someone else was given these gifts, they would have done far better than me. He understood that he's a channel, not an owner. He understood he's a channel, not a producer. That is a far greater message and a greater resonance. You can trust a man like that, because you know that you can trust your life with him, because you know his self-interest is not in the way. You look at a Talmud. Open up any page of a Talmud, any book of Talmud. So books begin usually what page? 1, right? Talmud begins always on page 2. Page 1 is the cover, is a blank page. Why? Beis Amud Aleph. Always Beis. You always see 2a. There's no such thing as Talmud 1a. Nowhere. There's no 1a. There's no 1b. It's always 2a, 2b. Every Talmud begins that way. Because it knows Reishis Chochma Yiras Hashem. The first page is blank. The first page is that there's something greater than you are. And then let's begin studying. In graphics, for example, even design, they'll tell you the white space on a page is more important than the black space where the ink is. And there's more white space actually than ink, because you'll see, you can have beautiful letters, but if they're bunched too much together and there's not enough white space, you won't be able to read it. We don't even realize it, because the white space is like invisible. But it's the contrast, the backdrop, upon which letters are juxtaposed. And the wisdom of true design is not the image, it's the image plus that invisible thing. And you'll see, if letters are, we read a book, you get so absorbed in the book you don't even realize you're reading letters. That's because the white space is in the right way. If you realize you're reading letters, there's a problem. So there's an invisibility, there's a certain backdrop that page 1 is always blank. The same thing is with real intelligence. The first page is blank. Not because we don't understand, or because you recognize there's something greater than you are. This is not just a nice virtue, nice, humble, It actually enhances intelligence when you have that. First of all, it gives the ability to be much more honest in your deductions, in your deducing, your ideas, your theorizing. Secondly, you will explore every option, even ones that disagree with you. You'll look at something and not just say, I'm right. You're going to look at the other angle and this angle. You'll stretch an idea in every direction. And finally, it just creates an integrity. I don't just want to know that something is mathematically right. I want to know that it's true. I want to know that it's going to work, not just because it makes sense on paper. And there's a certain what's the word for it? X factor there that's not exactly tangible. Two people can make an argument, but one is going to have that element of resonance. And then you can really build upon that. So in a fascinating way, wisdom, intelligence is really about understanding where it all begins. It doesn't begin with your understanding something. People will say, I really want to understand this. You really want to understand something? Begin from the beginning. Begin by acknowledging it's not yours. Then you'll start understanding it. You think it's yours, you're right away defeating. You'll never really own it. That's why you'll see, to absorb. For years I worked on remembering the Lubavitcher Rebbe's talks. People wonder, how do you remember hours and hours of these talks? Because it's not yours. It's not about me gaining knowledge and trying to understand it all. On the contrary, it's shedding your ego, putting it aside, shedding yourself, suspending your intelligence to absorb something that is beyond you. Most people don't know how to do that. The smarter you are, you usually do the opposite. Smarter person, hey, I get it. I don't need to put myself aside. On the contrary, I'll get it completely. I've shared that exercise that I've started developing, memory exercise. I'll share it now. For example, people wonder about that. I don't remember. So here's an exercise that's guaranteed to help you improve your memory by 20%. You could try it in the privacy of your home. It goes like this. You take a book, any book you like, a sefer, anything, and the goal is we're going to read a page. You can read it as many times as you like. Endless. No limit. No time limit. The goal is going to be to close the book and then write on a piece of paper what you just read. And it doesn't have to be word for word. It doesn't have to be verbatim. The ideas, the flow of ideas. And before I begin, I always say to people, before we begin, I'd like you to estimate, what do you think? You're going to get 100% of it? 5%? 20%? 50%? Usually people estimate between 60 and 80. And I would say if they were not so bashful, they would probably say higher, but they don't want to make it sound like they're too good. 60 to 80%. Then the exercise begins, and I could always tell the smartest ones will do it fastest. They read for quickly, blah, blah, and they're writing, and they're already done. The people who don't see themselves as so smart take more time, and the results are always the same. First of all, nobody hits the first time 60%. If 40%, they're lucky. And how do we know? You compare. You just open the book and look at the idea. Is it the same ideas or not? It's easy to test. And the smartest ones who did it fastest, their percentages are very low. As a matter of fact, not only don't they convey what it says on the page, in many instances, they contradict what it says on the page. They'll write something that actually is opposite what it says. Because they'd never read it. They used their minds. They were so overconfident that they decided to convey what they think is smart. They didn't write what the person wrote in the book. And they may be right even. They may be right, but that was not their exercise. Not to hear you. We were here to repeat what it says on the page. You want to rebut it? Rebut it later. And the second time around, everyone goes up from 40% to 60% at least, because overconfidence was the trap that nobody thought of. Everybody thought they're better than they are. So overconfidence. You think, what does overconfidence have to do with it? Yeah, it has a lot to do with it, because your attitude is, I get it already. I'm smart. I know what it says on the page, so I'll read it once or twice. The attitude is wrong. It doesn't have the ability of, it's not suspending yourself and really listening to what the page said, not what you say. They were processing instead of absorbing. It's just an exercise. Another exercise which is even more difficult is the next time you have a disagreement with your spouse, or with a close one, a serious disagreement, try this on for size. Go over to that person and say, look, I know we disagree about this, but I want to hear your position again. I'll be quiet. I want to hear you say it. And I'm going to repeat to you what you said, and tell me how accurately am I conveying your opinion. So first of all, most people don't have the guts to do that even, the courage. Just doing that is also an exercise that could probably help a lot of situations. Just the respect. But the most importantly, how many people can really repeat something they disagree with, exactly as the person said it? Because since you disagree, you're automatically, unconsciously, you're going to be repeating it in a way that you can show how it's a flawed argument. It's hard for you to, I disagree with you. How am I going to repeat what you said in the most exactly as you feel? I disagree with it. So the exercise of really hearing somebody else, listening to someone else, is really a tremendous exercise in number one in bittul and humility, but also in finding the truth. Because even if that person is wrong, let's say the person is wrong. So what? What did you do? The worst thing you did was you put yourself in their shoes, you repeated exactly what they said, and then you said, you know what, I heard what you said, and that person says, yes, you conveyed it right, and I still disagree. Now let me tell you why. So the worst is that you simply were able at least to see it from another perspective. Most likely what would happen is that you'll start seeing a virtue in that argument, maybe not complete, and maybe you can come to some common ground. But we don't even get to that first base, because we don't know how to do this. We are consumed with our perspective. And we're taught, you're a smart person, speak up, that's your position, hold strong, and so on. Of course there's a virtue in that, and not just to buckle and bend every time someone disagrees with you. But a sign of intelligence, especially before you've come to a conclusion, is to really stretch an idea in every direction. So Reishis Chachma Yiras Hashem is not just a nice thing. It's understanding that page 1 is blank. Page 1 is humility. And page 2 is where it begins. You begin the intelligence. So what is really intelligence actually is something beyond intelligence. That's what he says in Ayin Beis. It's brilliant actually, and fascinating. That the way to really connect to truth is to recognize that your intelligence that's coming into your system is intelligence, but it's coming from a place that's beyond intelligence. Not beyond as an irrational, beyond you and your ego and your needs and so on. And that allows you to become a channel. And therein lies the secret to expanding our intelligence. When a person has that type of humility, the channels open up between the unconscious and the conscious. You hear what I'm saying? I'm not saying that you don't need any pill. You don't need to smoke anything. You don't need to take anything. That's what it does it. Because it allows you to experience things that are greater than yourself. As long as you're consumed with yourself, you're only going to experience that which the self contains. But if you, so to speak, suspend yourself, what happens? You now become open to something beyond. I know it sounds counterintuitive. And the problem is the ego. We can't bring ourselves. So I once told this to somebody. He was a writer, a creative writer. She says to me, I hear you have ways of developing new channels of creativity. So I told him this. So he didn't even understand what I was saying. He says, oh great, how do I experience humility? Like that. He missed the point. The whole point of humility means humility. It doesn't mean you're going to now become more arrogant because now you have humility too. I told him it means real. It means that you really have to not take yourself so seriously, my friend. And if you stop taking, then it'll open up. So it really defies us if we try to bring ourselves. It's like someone says, yeah, you know what? I'm humble, I'm right there. You can give it to me. But here you can't trick the unconscious. It just won't enter. It's like you can't trick that dimension. You either are going to put yourself aside and allow it to enter, or it won't enter. That's it. There's nothing you can do. There's no magic to that. As a matter of fact, that was one of the reasons I was always disturbed, I would say. I was always, never, people have offered me different type of so-called psychedelics and stuff like that. I adamantly was against it, not for religious purposes or taboos, because to me it was really almost like a desecration of the true channels. It was like forcing open a door that you shouldn't be forced open because you haven't earned it. What are you doing there? You want to earn it? Pay the dues. And that's why any type of so-called artificial type of stimulation like that is not going to last. It can't last because you don't own it. You didn't own it. You forced open a door to the unconscious and you're able to experience for a moment something beyond yourself. I'm not even denying that it may be a real experience, but it wasn't your experience. It was the drug that did it. Which is why the Torah would call something like that Eish Zara, like an alien flame. It may be a flame that has power, but you didn't travel. It's not your journey. It was like someone took you on a journey that you don't really belong. It's like you haven't earned your way in. I'm not here just becoming an advocate, anti-drug advocate. That's not my intention here. And maybe it is my intention, but I'm saying that was not my point. My point was that the real way to open the channel that you can really keep it open is that type of recognition. It's not about you. It doesn't begin with you. It's a gift for you to be able to be the channel of it. And when you do that, it flows in. New levels of creativity have to flow in that. A second piece of suggestion that's given in Hasidic discourses, this is another discourse called Samach Vav, which is similar to another discourse, which if you're interested in, send us an email, I can send you some articles I've written about it. The second thing is exertion, which may be an outgrowth of the thing, exertion. The need to put effort into it. The Talmud says that if someone says, I've toiled and not discovered, don't believe them. If they say, I have discovered and not toiled, don't believe them. Only a gaitum etzasi tamen. They say, I've toiled and I've discovered, then believe them. If someone tells them they discovered something but they never made any effort, it's not believable. Someone says, I made an effort and I have not discovered, that's also not correct. You may not have yet discovered, or you haven't discovered at all. The effort and exertion goes hand in hand with results, which I know many of us don't like to hear. I'd rather have gifts without exertion. What does exertion do? It's a very interesting example. Think of a flintstone. A flintstone, to get fire out of it, a spark, what do you got to do? You can't just look at it. You can't wave to it. Like a hot coal, you can wave, fan the coals, and fire will emerge. With a flintstone, all that's not going to work. Only one way, you got to strike it, and hard, and then a spark. So Chassidic thought says that the flintstone is an example of accessing the unconscious. The unconscious has in it, locked in like a flintstone, sparks, but you can't get a spark. How do you get the spark? One, as I said, the humility, and two, exertion. You work hard. You study something once, twice, 3 times. You don't get it. You keep breaking your head. Then finally it breaks open and a spark emerges. Real exertion. Which obviously you won't do unless you have humility. Because if you're a smart guy, you say, I'm lazy. Why should I exert myself more than I need to? And many people can get away with automatic power. They have good brains, good minds. But exertion does something that nothing can compare to that. It's the sweat, the hard-earned effort. And again, you'll see this in sports, in many areas where basically, because unless you will do the hard work, you're not going to get there. There's no shortcuts. The most brilliant tennis players, most brilliant musicians, you'll see it all is what they'll all say. 90% sweat, 10% whatever skill. What is the expression they say? Sweat and some rhyme. It's sweat. What's the sweat? It's not. Why sweat? Why not? They have such natural born talent. Because there's something about effort that breaks open doors. To achieve excellence, you can be good, you can be great, but excellence will always take effort. You'll never see anyone that just does excellence automatic. Obviously, people have mazel and they can just try something and easily get results. But I'm talking about real excellence in skills, excellence in writing. Sometimes I read these classic books from the classics, and you're blown away by their ability to write. People like Victor Hugo, Charles Dickens, the classic writers, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, and such people. And as a writer, I can tell you, you're humbled. You say, man, alive, look at this, unbelievable, genius. And then you read a little about how they wrote. They didn't just sit down, and twiddle their thumbs in here, right? People struggled. And you start saying, maybe, if I struggled more, maybe I don't know if I could achieve that. Obviously, they're also geniuses. There's no question about it. But there's no such thing as no struggle. Moses struggled, King Solomon struggled, they all struggled. And the wisdom did not spoil them. It's not like because they were smart, they say, because I'm smart, I don't have to struggle so much. When they said that, they would never be who they became. It was because they had real wisdom, and their wisdom dictated that there's something beyond intelligence that caused them to work for it. And know you got to sweat it through. You see this all the time. I deal with people, sometimes, guys, kids, and people that are very smart. And the biggest challenge, they're lazy. They're smart because they can get away with 1 minute, with another person takes 5 hours in class and so on. So they develop a certain element of, taking for granted their skills, and they don't want to work hard. And then they see other people achieve greatness, and they think, hey, I'm almost there already. They don't know, they realize the dues that one has to pay. I can tell you as a writer, it doesn't matter how many years you write, it's always hard. The only thing is, because you've done it so many times, you have the confidence to know you can get there. So confidence helps that to forge ahead. But there's no such thing as writing without some blind spot, without some blanking out, without what we call writer's block. Everyone has blocks. As a matter of fact, I don't even know there isn't. Every time you write, sit down, there's a block. The question is how big the block is. Sometimes you need a few days, you need a little time. But there's always a block, because to get something down on paper is harder than not to get it down. Does that make sense? So anything that's hard to do is going to have a resistance. I can tell you sometimes I procrastinate for days until deadline strikes, and then okay, this is it, the clock's ticking. Deadlines are actually God gifts. It's a miracle that we have deadlines. I don't think I'd still be in the middle of my first article if I didn't have a deadline. Time, I need to perfect it. which is really a part of laziness and so on. So exertion. These are the things, exertion and humility is the exertion that comes to understand that intelligence is actually something beyond intelligence, that's masquerading, you could say, it dresses up in what we call the rational. So it's really truth packaged in intelligence. Not intelligence accessing truth, it's truth manifesting intelligence. That's what he ultimately says in Ayin Beis. So it comes from the deepest regions of Keser, of the unconscious, a truth, and the truth then gets packaged. In the mind it's packaged as intelligence, in the heart it's packaged as emotions. But it's all the same truth. Which is a tremendous way, I haven't had the time, but I would love to explore this idea with modern day scholars, psychologists, people who study the mind, even neurologists, and just to understand, to compare notes and see how this mystical and Hasidic explanation of intelligence works. I think it would be a tremendous contribution. I don't think modern science actually sees it quite that way, but they would if they understood this approach. Because it's a whole different take on intelligence. You see, we take intelligence as being, there are animals out there, we're smarter, we've developed weapons, we can subdue them, hey, we're smart, we're the best. It actually leads us into becoming arrogant, into becoming superior. When in truth, if you think of it from this perspective, the exact opposite. Intelligence is a gift of truth coming into you, and looks like intelligent, but don't ever think it's yours. Like I said before, copyright law maybe protects for incentive purposes, but it's not because intelligence is owned by anybody. It's not owned by anybody. The whole battle with Google was this. Google is is scanning all the books, and most of the books they're scanning are beyond copyright law because the copyrights already have expired. And they're just simply saying it's a public service. We're just scanning the knowledge of the world. I think the founders of the internet, what did they say? Information wants to be free. That was the slogan. That's why they didn't charge, etc. Information wants to be free. But we live in a world where there's a whole bunch of people who don't want it to be free because they want to make money. Not because they'll also probably pontificate that information is free. But they'll say we have to pay for the pipelines to get it to you. Like, the rabbi that charged $10,000. The pipes cause the money, not the intelligence. But regardless of this, I'm not going to get into the cynical mode of money and how money taints everything. But the fact is, however, there's truths that are deeper than money. Let's put it this way. And there are truths that last and go with you even after you leave this world. Money does not. No one of the greatest billionaires has ever discovered how to take their money with them. What does that tell you about their intelligence? There's some things that are deeper than what we think is power. This temporary world, yes, money, materialism talks, and I'm not saying it isn't necessary, and I'm not saying it's not important, but you have to call a spade, meaning to know what is truth and what's not. Truth lives on, because it's not owned by anybody. Things that are owned by people die with those people, and that's it, and they're not going to heaven with them. It always amazes me how people will, till the last breath, will hold on to their money as if you're taking it with you. But you're not taking it. No one can take it. No one has ever discovered how to do that. And no one ever will. You know why? Because you go into a spiritual realm where money doesn't matter. What do they say up when you come up and the guy says, here, I have a check, I can buy my way in. He says, here, we don't take checks, we only take receipts. Because that's how it is. In the spiritual world, matter doesn't matter. Well, matter doesn't matter. How do you like that? We just coined that, or maybe it may have been said. I'm not going to, no intellectual property here. Anybody can say it. Matter doesn't matter. Or as Lawrence Taylor, linebacker for the New York Giants, once said, they asked him, how do you play while you're so injured? He says, mind over matter. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter. It's another take on mind over matter. So the point is that that material life, however, has its tentacles. It holds us hostage. So even till the last second we're breathing, we still think this is it. This is part of the bizarre reality. But everybody understands that there are deeper truths. Now, look at even the United States, how it was founded. You read the Declaration of Independence. I would call it close to a sacred document to me. Not because I think the founding fathers were sacred people, but what they wrote was definitely a wisdom that was beyond them. Because they wrote things in there that actually defied their own lives. They built into their lines that would ultimately abolish slavery, that they were all slaves, many of them owned slaves. And they wrote there, all men are created equal. Obviously they thought the blacks weren't men then. But ended up being, that was the line that changed the whole thing, that's exactly. So how they did that, I have to say, with some divine inspiration. And the inspiration was basically, really, when they wrote that we hold these truths to be self-evident. And you don't see they never write there to be wealthy, to make money. They never said the mission of the United States is to be the best company in the world and the most efficient business. Never stated such a thing. They said the most important thing in America is to be a free country and preserve human rights. They understood if you do that, you create a breeding ground that everyone would come, and then you'd have a thriving economy. What's happened to America is, unfortunately, the economy has become more important than those principles. But those principles would allow a country like this to become, with all its flaws. I'm not saying this country doesn't have its flaws, but its qualities, the ability to be able to extract talent from everywhere, was based on because rights were protected. And those countries where rights weren't protected, ultimately, talent was not protected either. And why would anyone stay in a oppressive government regime? It's also fascinating to me, of all countries in the world, and I explored, maybe I missed one, there's no currency. America, the epitome of materialism, money. What does it say in our money? Every dollar bill, every coin, in God we trust. I find it quite interesting. With all the so-called church and state separation and the wars about atheism in the schools and 10 Commandments, the displays and all that, in God we trust remains in there. Yeah, I'm sure there's some people trying to get rid of it, but they haven't done so. I find it interesting. On money, every penny you spend has the word God in it. I find it to be, it's like mind-boggling, actually. The only way I understand it is because, in a sense, America has, somewhere in their unconscious, a sense that the real truth of things is not money, it's God. And they put it on the money. Now, this doesn't mean that people aren't selfish and so on, but it does mean that there are truths that are self-evident and deeper. The truth that the Declaration says that all human beings are created equal, and they're inalienable rights, nobody can take them away from you. This is a truth that is not based on logic, because based on logic, well, the Nazis also said everybody was equal except Jews and gypsies and anyone they didn't like. And others also said, they chose who's equal, who's not. So there's a truth that is higher than, there's an intelligence that's higher than intelligence. And the truth is, what I'm saying now is very resonating. If you look at many of the so-called futuristic science fiction films, whenever they talk about higher intelligence, you'll always see it's always connected to a form of humility. Remember that? What was the one with her in the show where they go and they see she's always been looking for life on other planets, and then she meets her father there. It was Jodie Foster was the actress, Contact. And she begins as an arrogant scientist who doesn't believe in God and everything. And you have also in 2001, Space Odyssey, you'll always find that whenever they discover higher intelligence, always connected to some form of humility, of like the awe of something beyond themselves. It's interesting, I always notice that. The higher intelligence never creates arrogance, it creates always humility. Because that's the fact. When you start realizing what intelligence really is, you realize that you stand in awe of a truth that's greater than you are. And if a person is honest, they have to say that. We have a mind. Imagine, here, everybody sitting in this room, everyone listening to this class, we were once a smaller than a follicle of hair when we were conceived. One cell. The miracle of that, no one can even understand. And suddenly, with these complex individuals living here, we were once one cell, and suddenly that cell became multiplied, and a brain developed, and a heart developed, and we have this whole life we have. And tell me what that elicits in any normal, decent person. Forget about logic, knowledge. It's awesome, beyond awesome. When you have your own child, you see it as you see the miracle in front of you. It's impossible to deny. And I'm not, as you'll say to me, was this a rational statement that I just made? Frankly, maybe the most rational statement I've ever made. I think this is more rational than all calculations you make. Calculations are calculations, mathematical equations. So what? Yeah, makes something more efficient. Numbers, a good theory, a good business plan. So good, you'll create efficiency. You'll make some money from it, hopefully, and so on. But a miracle like that is truth. You want truth? That's truth. What is that? It's a mystery. But the mystery doesn't bother us because it's not like a mystery that we all would embrace such mysteries. It's like a magical thing. So intelligence essentially is really a truth that's packaged in the form that we call rational intelligence. So it brings me back to the chapter, Zeis Chukas HaTorah, right? This is the law of the Torah. And it's a law that is super rational. God says to purify from death, you take the ashes of a red heifer, mix it with water, you spray it. What does it mean? What's the rational? But we're told this because we're told to come to teach us that real intelligence is beyond intelligence. Sometimes that intelligence takes on the shape and we can understand it, and sometimes we can't. You explain to me the birth of a child and how that works. No one can understand it. We can replicate it. We can study it. But to understand it? How are you going to understand? We don't know what's on the other side of the curtain. Our intelligence starts with the spark that's on this side. So how can we understand? But we know it's there because it had to come from there. However you define that there, but it's undeniable. You can just say, it didn't come from nothing. You know, that scientist had a debate with God and said to God, anything you did, I can do. You know, so what's the big thing? You created something, I could also. So God says, okay, go ahead. So he takes a pile of dirt from the ground and he's going to so God says, no, use your own dirt. Use your own earth, He's going to take the earth to then plant something and replicate, in other words, some vegetation or whatever it is. So God says, use your own earth. Okay, that's a problem. Where's he going to get his own earth? It's just a lesson in life. And I think this is not necessarily, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to appreciate it. You just have to step back and not take ourselves so seriously. It doesn't begin with me and you. There's a bigger picture. This doesn't make us nobodies. On the contrary, to really be a somebody, to really appreciate who you are, is to recognize this truth. Then you're a person of integrity. We're talking about something real and so on. And you're able to communicate to people in a different way. You speak with your children differently, with friends. A person who has that sense of humility, that sense of awe, that sense that even the most brilliant mind is a mind that's coming from a greater place. That doesn't take away the brilliance, it actually adds to it. Some say Einstein's greatest innovations was precisely because he wasn't trained, and because he was a postal clerk, and because he used his imagination, his childish imagination. He says, one of his lines is, you can never change a system from within a system. Had he been going by the rules that he was taught in school, he would never have gone further than follow those rules, or maybe expand them a bit. He had to go to a place of imagination, pure dreaming. Imagination that was defied logic. And when he first explained some of his theories, it was ridiculous, it was crazy. Time can be bent, light can be bent, time is relative. It's crazy ideas that didn't make any sense at the time, the way he understood the world. And then quantum mechanics is even more bizarre. States of probability, uncertainty, and you can't measure it while you can't know its velocity and while measuring it, and its speed at the same time, position and velocity at the same time, etc. Very bizarre results that, frankly, have changed the world. Because you know why? Because at some point scientists realize this is for sure the case. I don't understand it, but it's just impossible to deny. Had they been obstinate and say, I must understand it, we would still be in that age. There was an acceptance of truth that became apparent. And this is really true across the board, and recognizing also to get beyond the fact we have all self-interest. Ultimately, self-interest defeats everything. The greatest ideas. So the humility helps counter the self-interest, and it helps us really align ourselves, assimilate into something that's higher than ourselves. So instead of intelligent being something that you're owning, it's actually you're submitting to, you're surrendering to an idea. That's a far better way of saying than I am owning or understanding the idea. You surrender to an idea, then you own it. Then it becomes part of you. You're part of the idea rather than it being part of you. Let's put it that way. And that's when knowledge and information becomes something that is organic and that grows and it connects like an interface, like a portal between the deeper levels of unconscious wisdom to our conscious world. Recognizing that our conscious is one small little speck of a big picture, far bigger picture. And what we get is a spark here, a spark there, a flash, innovation, an epiphany. And we stand in awe, we stand in respect to the greater reality that we are able to be honored to be part of. That's what Zeis Chukas HaTorah means. So with that said, I hope everybody can assimilate this concept. I think it's a brilliant way approach to life, a brilliant way to approach your mind even, and allow ourselves to really open up to newer, deeper experiences. Think of how this can affect even when you have a problem. It helps you think out of the box instead of being trapped in your problem and your solutions. And me, a sense of humility helps you think, you know what, maybe there's another way to look at it. And maybe that can be your salvation. And issues in areas of relationships where our emotions are involved and we get obsessed and we get agonized and we're aggravated. If you're able to suspend and step back a moment, look at some bigger picture, how there could be tremendous effect on just allowing yourself to look at different solutions. People who tell me that their life is over with, the despair, depression, it all comes down to a certain element of self-containment, not recognizing there's something more than you are. By knowing that alone begins to open up. Maybe there's another possibility. Who says you have it all figured out? So there's tremendous, an endless amount of applications that these ideas can be used for to actually help us grow, help us look at new ways of solving issues. Like I said, so many different ways that this can help. So hopefully you can innovate and figure out ways that can help you. And as always, hopefully the Meaningful Life Center, myself, Belville, and our team can continue to do what we do. And please see us as a resource, as friends in this journey that we're all on. Philip will be giving his class tomorrow. I believe so. And again, I want to say it's the merit of Refuah Shleima complete for Yisrael, Yosef, Arya Leben Liba Bluma, right? And we will be here next week. I'll still be here. I'll be there before. It's all right. But we'll be here next week. It'll be a class, and we continue the journey together, and hopefully we find our destinies. Thank you so much.